Darshan. In this episode, we have a very interesting topic that we're going to talk about raga and the brain and how that influences Indic traditions. And we have with us Dr. Shantala Hegde, who's a clinical neuropsychologist and additional professor at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bengaluru. She's an expert in the field of neuromusicology and she's studying the intersections of music and the brain. She heads the Music Cognition Laboratory and the Clinical Neuropsychological Unit and Neuro Rehab Services at NIMHANS. She has a Wellcome Trust TBT India Alliance Clinical Fellow and fellowship, and she's been working on cognitive and neurological functions, especially how music can be used in rehab. Um, Her research is informed by her background as a Hindustani classical music vocalist, and she's particularly interested in how music affects the human psyche and the concept of neural plasticity, or indeed the brain's ability to reorganize itself. And she's also trained in neurologic music therapy and one of India's first affiliate professional members of the Academy of Neurologic Music Therapy. She is the faculty in charge of the Music Cognition Laboratory, a Wellcome Trust Fellow, and a very sought after speaker, including the ET Edge Diabetes India Summit and the Never Alone Summit. Welcome, Shantala. It's lovely to have you on the Neurokrish immersion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. My pleasure.
We have this very interesting theme. Of course, we've talked about brain, mind, and music before. And this time, of course, we're talking about raga and the brain, music, mind, and healing in Indic traditions. And I think we both have this common interest in Indic traditions, which makes it even more interesting to talk today.
Yes.
Your work bridges clinical neuropsychology and Indic traditions. Could you discuss how the concept of raga, with its specific melodic structures and associated emotions, translates into a framework that a neuroscientist like yourself can study?
Yeah, so when we are talking about raga and music, I think maybe I should give a prelude to how I got into this field and what motivated me. One was that I realized there was very little work that had happened, systematic work, so to say, in music and neuroscience from our country. And when there's so much happening in the West, almost 2.5, 3 decades of body of work that was already there, I said, where do we start from, if at all? If we take that model, where do we start from? It's very hard because, on one hand, we say music is universal, certain features are universal. And second, if we are talking about studying it from a neuroscience perspective, we need to have certain experimental design or approach. So it was like similar to our Indian traditions, right? Studies on Indian traditions, understanding mind, psyche. Sometimes we wonder if the current neuroscience, is it really the tool to understand mind and psyche and the complex philosophical terms that we talk, which are more experiential in nature. Keeping this in mind, I said, let me start. Being a student of Hindustani music, I said, we need to start with some structure. So I took thought of the Hindustani tradition and selected some ragas that would represent each of these thoughts. But by then I already knew, if you're talking about emotion, one thing we know about Indian ragas, whether it is classical in North Indian tradition or the South Indian tradition, is that a given raga can evoke more than one emotion. We say Ranjayati raga. That means that which evokes that emotion is raga. But it is not like one-to-one correlation. It's not like one raga will evoke only one emotion. So then next question is, then how do I study? Are we looking at discrete emotion theory, or are we looking at from a dimensional perspective? Are we looking at what approach to take? This was really a tough place to be in, and a young researcher into the field, and to take like two mega fields and trying to club together. One thing that when we did it on either trained musicians or people who were untrained, formally trained in music, but exposed to music of all kinds. Mostly in our population, if you ask, they are often listening to film music. Nevertheless, there is an implicit exposure to ragas through Bollywood, Tollywood, Kannada, whatever industry that you talk about, there is inherently ragas implicitly there. What we realized through a couple of initial work is that whether you take these ragas, more than one emotion does get evoked, no, undoubtedly, and they kind of correlate with the rasa theory of the Indian classical tradition. And I am talking about Hindustani because I have not done so much work in the Carnatic tradition yet. And second, the important aspects, as a scientist, I realized there are so many variables that one needs to keep in mind. What instrument should I take? Because timbre we know can impact. It is also known as timbre by some people, pronounced as timbre, but timbre can affect the emotional experience, or the speed, whether it is slow or fast tempo. The speed of the excerpt that you choose can actually impact the emotion experience. The pitch register, am I taking low pitch, high pitch, and the melodic structure of it, the density of notes coming, we call that as event density. So in Hindustani we can say ornamentation, in Carnatic we'll say whether gamakas are coming, in a given time frame, how many notes are coming, what kind of ornamentation is coming. These are some of the complex inherent features that are impacting emotion in raga research. So I wish it was very simple, but it isn't. If we were to study that from a neuroscience perspective, of course, as a student of music, or as a having in-depth passion for our traditional music, I know each raga has its own personality, each raga can have its own impact. But I think if we were to it's very hard to just directly correlate and say, I will take this raga and study it this way. The biggest question would be, if it's raga A, why not raga B, C, D, E? And the second thing we saw in some of our work is in Indian tradition, any raga is presented over time. It's not like 5-minute composition or a 2-minute presentation. You may still be able to present a raga there, but traditionally, if you think of how a raga is presented in a concert, it is at least 15 minutes to half an hour, sometimes 45 minutes or 1 hour, right? And in Hindustani, it can be longer raga presentation. Even there are different phases of raga presentation. You have the alap, then you have in the instrument traditions, you have the jod jala, pulsation coming, then you have the dhrit composition, that is a fast composition, and then ati dhrit can also come. Now when we took emotional experiences of people who are not trained in music, we realized that the ala portion, if we take of raga A, B, C, we had certain scientific basis hypothesis as to why we chose these ragas. The ala portion for an untrained ear of raga A versus raga B may be seeming very similar in comparison to raga A from point A to point B, that is from alap to jod jala or ati dhrit. So for example, Yaman, I take Yaman and Bihag. For an untrained ear, it may seem similar in the alap portion, or the emotion experience may seem very positive, pleasant, happy, or Shringara rasa, that we say, romantic feeling. But if you take Yaman from alap to Yaman jod jala versus Bihag alap to Bihag jod jala, the within raga experience can be much more wider compared to between the raga. So if that is the case, we are dealing with a complex system. We need perhaps a different type of study approach or a neuroscientific approach to look into it. So yeah, these were my initial challenges and my work into raga. But now I'm saying that it doesn't matter which raga or aspect. We are talking about breaking it down into components of music, and these components can be universal. Yeah, so there are certain ragas which can be categorized as, having minor notes and major notes. It's not as simple as in the Western tradition, but we have much more complex. There are ragas which have a combination of Shuddha swaras with the Komal swaras. So there are such permutation combination. Keeping that in mind, the common denominator is pleasantness. There's a common effect of increased alpha, especially when you take in the lower tempo, that is the alap phase. When you take from alap to Jorjala, there is a difference in the arousability factor. People do say that yes, the intensity of that emotion changed, or it became +2 higher on the joyfulness, or the ragas that have minor notes seem to have more of negative emotions. It could be high on arousability, but emotions like anger or emotions like some kind of unpleasantness coming through. So these are some of the minor variations that can come about. Enculturation plays a very important role. How much am I exposed? I may not be formally trained, but how much music do I listen to? My inherent semantic knowledge of these ragas and a context that they would have learned over time can influence the emotional experiences. So if we talk about raga therapy or raga chikitsa and all, I think as a clinician, it's important to keep all these factors in mind. There are so many factors that can have, interplay and bring about changes. We need to keep all this in mind.
That is fascinating. I'm going to say that given that you're also a trained and performing musician, please feel free to break into song as an example. We would only be very, very to have that also as part of the podcast. We love examples because I think not everyone listening is going to be aware of, for example, what is Jorjala.
Jorjala, it would be hard to present in vocal because it's a more of the feature that would come in instrumental music, like in flute or sitar or something. But if you're talking about ragas with only major notes, like for example, Bilawal or Shankarabharana, Saregama Padani Sa, Sani Da Pa Magare Sa, all major notes. But if I bring in Komal swaras, that would be Saregama Padani Sa, Sani Da Pa Magare Sa. Or this is Bhairav, but you can even change the ni to Komal. Saregama Padani Sa, Sani Da Pa Magare Sa. Saregama Padani Sa, Sani Da Pa Magare. So basically you are playing around with notes or a pentatonic scale like Sarega Pada Sa Sa Da Pa Gare Sa. I changed the shadja here. For an untrained ear also, they'll say, oh, there was something different here, right?
Right.
Yeah, so there are innumerable ragas with Shuddha swaras and Komal swaras. And it's just not what I presented just now offhand was Aroha Avroha. But truly speaking, just Aroha Avroha is not raga. Just these swaras are not raga. It is like saying I have ear, nose, features. It's like every human being will have these features or some notes. But Dr. Krishnamurti is different and Shantala is different. So there are so many aspects to that permutation combination of those notes that make the raga. In both Carnatic and Hindustani, we have ragas which have common notes, same notes, like Bhoop versus Deshkar. In Hindustani, same notes. But is my nose a little elongated, or is my hair is longer, a little longer? How do I present that feature? Actually is raga. So just the notes are not raga. So that becomes the biggest challenge when I have to do neuroscientific research again.
I'm just connecting 2-3 things here. The one thing, of course, we started off by talking about neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
The other thing is, of course, what you were just saying, that how much exposure a person has had will also have an impact as to what it's doing to them.
True.
And in this context, if you think about it from a neural perspective, what's happening in the brain, what do you think happens in the brain, or what does research tell us happens in the brain when you are constantly or repeatedly exposed to certain kinds of music?
Yeah. So one is music itself is a very rich auditory stimulation, right? we listen to this auditory stimulation, well organized. It's like language, but we easily know that what is noise versus what is music. It can be any form of music. Second, it's just not combination of notes. When we start singing, there is rhythm in it. Then there comes a feature of emotion. I sing something without emotion, it can't be music. Then comes my inherent need to enter into that either rhythm or the beat. So there is combination of my motor functions getting aligned with the listening part of it. Then there is because of its such close association with emotion and memory, I listen to something, I encode it with the situation, with the environment, with the surrounding, or with the lyrics. So it's already a very rich multisensory information that we are fed into. And today what we know from a lot of neuroscience research is that it engages multiple neural networks in the brain. First, attention, because it's something that is unfolding in time. Like I listen to something in music, it's unfolding in time. That means my information processing, my attention has to be there and keeping up with the rhythm. This is both passive and more so when you're actively engaging in music. So there are two aspects to it. Because it engages multiple neural networks like attention, information processing, emotion, motor pathways, language, memory, and then because of the emotional centers being activated, there is a combination of neural chemical changes occurring. Like we get goosebumps, some songs, or when we listen to our national anthem, for example, we feel that goosebumps. It's a sudden rush of dopamine, reward mechanism that's happening. So, therefore, music is considered as one of the very strong or powerful way where neural plasticity is actually being facilitated or enhanced. So when you talk about music, not everybody has to be a musician, but engaging with music passively or actively, thereby you're repeatedly activating these multiple networks and strengthening these networks in the brain, which basically we are talking about facilitating neural plasticity, enhancing your cognitive reserve. That's the biggest thing. So therefore, music has its benefits beyond just a realm of music for humans.
That's so interesting. So I'm going to ask you a kind of related question. If I did not know my national anthem was my national anthem and I had not been exposed to it for years and years and years, will the music alone evoke that emotion in me? Or is it that how much of this is the knowledge that this is something as opposed to just the music itself evoking an emotion? Do we have an answer to that?
It may be a combination of both, because some studies that have been done, especially work by Robert Zettore, Vinod Menon, and Dan Levitin, who have studied dopamine release while listening to music or reward mechanisms. One is self-chosen music, my own choice of music, something that I listen to often may have that impact. But given our own experience, sometimes we may listen to completely a foreign language, some new piece that I've just chanced upon on my playlist or something. Certain features, certain sudden note hitting top, or the feature itself can evoke certain, that goosebump or phenomena. So it can be a combination of both, which again points out to the fact that music is universal, it's very biologically based, and it could also be because of the activation of those areas.
In fact, they say that about Mozart's
of
music.
the brain, then releasing it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So Mozart thing became a more of a commercial phenomenon way back in 1990s, actually. So it later we got to know that it just need not be Mozart. Studies are still being done to understand whether it's only Mozart K444 or that composition. and a lot of work being done even in patients with epilepsy, for example, to see its impact in patients with epilepsy. But today we know that it need not be Mozart alone. It can be any music, engaging with music itself that is enriching, enhancing neural plasticity, and having, as I said, far transfer, having benefits beyond the realm of music for humans.
Given that our Indic tradition is, and the ragas are not just random sequences of notes, and they do have specific rules, like you demonstrated the Aro and the Avrona. And these rules are there. This structured, and of course, there's interpretation. So there's both a structured and an improvised nature to ragas, which is a bit different from how Western music is perhaps composed and played. What differences does this have on the listener?
Some of these questions that you're asking are my lifetime, quest, truly speaking. The reason is, one, yes, there should be and there is a scientific basis for why these structures were made or different ragas are in place. That can be a lot of literature is there from the music theory point of view. There are theories talking about that it emerged from the Vedas to begin with, the Sama Veda, because in the Rig Veda there were 3 notes, and then Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita. Then came Sama Veda where 5 notes came into picture. And some theories also talk about how each of these swaras are connected to something in the nature, like Sa for a particular sound of a particular animal, Gandhar for something, Panchama for something, like that, each note. We've come long way from that point, because there is another theory which is saying it could be, our Indian tradition came from folk music. Maybe perhaps, the pre-modern humans engaged in music, some kind of vocalization, some kind of singing, which also helped in development of language and also traditions of music. So I am not sure. I sometimes I spend a lot of time thinking to myself as to how research bringing new neuroscience and raga should go on. Should it be like understanding why these raga structure came about? What is the relationship between these ragas and various aspects of emotion? Because there are hundreds of ragas. Where do we begin with? And how will I discern that there are some parent ragas, then there are Janya ragas, Janaka ragas and Janya ragas. So it's like some genetic analysis, and it's very complex in that sense. But if my approach in therapy as a clinician, I say, let me take a given raga and I set some rules. I'll take in this instrument and this particular tempo, because my clinical goal is something like I want my patient to relax and just listen to it in a meditative state. I may choose something that is not in a fast tempo, because I know tempo can entrain. As I said, motor entrainment can happen, autonomic function entrainment can happen. So keeping that kind of clinical goals, I think it would be much easier rather than saying A raga to B raga or to a C raga. And I would like to reiterate this point that irrespective of which raga we take, and I think in Indian tradition, both Carnatic and Hindustani, the common denominator of the emotion is peacefulness, Shanta Rasa. And the second is our Indian tradition, whether it emerged from Vedas or let's say folk tradition, whatever it might be, but more so in Carnatic tradition where lyrics are given so much of importance and has so much of rich tradition in the bhakti aspect of it. So which will help patients or the listener to engage with these lyrics and thinking in psychology and in psychiatry and neuroscience, we know, right, whatever you keep repeating will become your will get consolidated in your mind and then later comes out as your behavior. So I think the richness of Indian music can be looked at it from multiple direction.
That's very insightful. If I can ask the contra question, because sound, we live in a world of sound and noise, traffic and noise pollution, and
Mm.
that we know has a deleterious effect on us.
Mm.
In similar vein, is there such thing as a wrong raga to be listening to in circumstances?
Yeah, raga may not be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and um, if it again, it could be one part is enculturation. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very familiar with, let's say, Carnatic music, certain instrument,
Mm-hmm.
and certain tempo, after a point, maybe my brain will not enjoy it or not engage with it in a very pleasant way. It
Right.
may happen vice versa. I've had participants coming into lab who say, I've never listened to Hindustani classical music, and I play bansuri or some instrument. And they'll say, when we take their musical behavior questionnaire, they'll say, okay, maybe this music I've heard those days, of course, in Doordarshan, and like a condolence kind of music. So they associate with that. Maybe
Yes.
after a point, they may not enjoy it.
Right.
So, appreciation, certain genres, certain things may become as part of our like and dislike.
Right.
That is to do with exposure. But second point that you mentioned with noise. Noise is basically, raga cannot be noise, but if the instrumentation, wrong tuning, apaswara, that's what we call as noise. Then there is jarring impact on our ear. Harmony, whether you're trained or not trained, all neurologically intact individuals are musical in nature. That means we are able to discern this is correct combination of notes, this is not correct combination of notes. Like earlier, I changed the shadja, I changed sa point first time when I said the Arva to the group one. So even if you're not trained, you could realize there's something different the way I landed. So
This.
yeah, so that way. But noise is something which we, in the current world, we are exposed to. Not from the music point of view, but yeah, a lot of studies are yet to be done looking at negative impact of certain music. We do not know that yet.
I'm just relating to some personal experience, and I want to ask you this question. Just on that point of playing that bansuri, and it is kind of associated in the mind with something. So I was listening to Agam, and their interpretation of Sita Kalyana Vaibohame. And of course, that, for example, if you're part of Indic tradition and you go to functions, whether it's, recently at 260th birthday functions where this was sung, any wedding you go, it is sung. It's got such a auspicious and pleasant feeling because you now associate it with celebrating that union. How much does that kind of association have to do with how our emotions are provoked? Because
Yes, a lot. Actually, a lot. In fact, so interestingly, even in film music, for example, especially, maestros like Ilayaraja and all of them have used certain ragas which otherwise in classical tradition is considered as a, let's say, a sober raga or a melancholic raga or a sad raga, so to say. Shivaranjani, for example, has been used like such a beautiful romantic songs. So it depends on the artist, how the freedom that they have to use this permutation combination of the raga to present something. It is the artist has that freedom, the manodharma. And that's why I say, if you have to study neuroscience perspective, there are so many factors we have to keep in mind.
Right. Just like
like you said, just like how you mentioned, the association with certain events in our life. And in fact, that is why in studies that are being done on patients with degenerative condition, music, listening to their favorite music helps in retrieval of autobiographical memory.
Right.
Yeah, so that's biggest example of strong association with events and music and emotions.
Right. Right. So that explains why I have this warm, fuzzy feeling with Sita Kalyanam. Um, so, so much of research in your field is on Western, centric models. And
Yeah.
of course, you're trying to path break through, how do you navigate Indic knowledge, and how do you bring this into your clinical practice and research? And of course, I think in practice, yes, because we are able to integrate what's familiar to the person we are working with. But what about in research? How do you study Indic models of music and music tradition in research?
So that is why, over time I realized these are the challenges. And how do I then, if I'm interested as a neuropsychologist, to look at what we started off discussing about neural plasticity and how we can tap to this aspect, the powerful thing that music has to facilitate neural plasticity, and how we can translate it to neuro rehabilitation.
Yeah.
From that point of view, I said there are so many aspects in our Indian tradition that can be broken down, mapped on to the current principles of neuropsychological rehabilitation, and then adapted to what we require. If you listen to music, passive listening or listening to Indian music, yes, it's like saying, please have good food, diet. But if you go to a doctor saying, I have this problem, then the doctor will have to run through some blood tests and say, okay, this is the deficiency that you have. We need to address this. So you'll say vitamin B12 or vitamin A and all of that. Similarly, you say music therapy. Unfortunately, the approach is, okay, you'll play some music, you make them listen to music. It's like giving good food. Maybe over time something gets compensated, no doubt, somewhere. But as a researcher, I will not know what really worked, what component worked, how did it work. That is the part of the research, right? How and why and the process of it. So in a couple of my studies, we are, with me and my students, our team, we are taking, for example, Konnakol or the bowl in Indian rhythmic traditions. How do you keep up with the rhythm? Like patients with Parkinson's have difficulty with beat perception. So in our initial work, I said it's like tiny little bricks that we tried to put together. My first couple of years of work was basically to correlate and yes, establish that music aspects of musical processes do strongly correlate with the non-musical domain of cognitive functions, because that's the key thing in clinical population and it has an impact on their day-to-day function. So how rhythm? Now when we say rhythm, Western studies have looked at beat, just simple beat, metronome and all of that. But in our Indian tradition, along with beat, we have this very unique language for itself. I can, like learning working memory task, for example, 16 beat cycle. I can teach my patient with an 8 beat cycle, keep up with that 8 beat. Can you remove one beat and perform? So the sense of time, the rhythm, and this can be such rich cognitive exercise for even untrained people and more engaging. So people enjoy when you say, okay, this kind of task is so engaging, and adherence to treatment is also much better compared to traditional approach to neuropsychological rehabilitation. Of course, we have, I would say, are taking baby steps in the field. A lot more work to be done.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful work that you're doing. I have this, when I look at my Apple Music, I get music that's supposed to calm me, music that's supposed to energize me, music that's supposed to make me walk faster or, jog or whatever. Is this really possible? Is there a science behind classifying music in this way? Are there calming ragas, energizing ragas? That's one question. Because I've heard also music therapists, people who call themselves music therapists, talk about this, that this particular raga is good for this. Just wanted your opinion on that.
Yeah, there are definitely, it's like each personality. So if you really go into the depth of understanding raga, a true musician will say that raga is, as I said, not just the swaras. It's not just the aroha, avroha, or the combination of notes, or just the pakkad or the, the key feature, what we say. Raga is much more than that. that.
Mm. Mm.
And so it's just like personality. Some people have an extroverted personality, some have introverted personality, some have. So as psychiatrists and psychologists will appreciate that, right? Temperament, for example. Each person has their own temperament.
Yes.
So some people have a calming effect when they enter the room. Some people will make you laugh. Some people will make you feel happy and joy. Same thing happens with certain ragas, as I said, because of certain notes, the existence of certain notes. So if we talk about ragas, and each raga has its own personality. It's not just the combination of swaras.
Mhm.
And if we take the Hindustani tradition, where the Art Prahar system is there, that means raga with time association is there. Then, if you look at carefully, the morning ragas and the evening ragas, the dawn and the dusk ragas have more minor notes. And it will associate or correlate with our own, arousability from morning till evening and, late evening. Morning, I just need time to wake up and get used to my routine. Evening, after a long day, I need to kind of slow down. It helps there. If you look at afternoon ragas, they're very bright with all like the sarang prakar all come in the afternoon. So I'm sure if we go by this, there is definitely a pattern in how these ragas are presented, the combinations and everything. My biggest challenge as a researcher, as a in neuroscience research is, how do you then study all of this? So many factors when they are there. We need to go small, tiny bit by bit. that is the challenge. Like we can't straight away say I'll do an RCT study like this, or a case study. Then it could be as personal choice, my exposure, my background. So yeah, but there is I think definitely an association with the feature of the raga and its impact. But it's not just one raga. That's my thing. There could be multiple ragas creating the same impact for an untrained ear, especially.
Right.
Mm.
And can I ask you, the legend of Tansen singing until it rained. Uh, how does one explain that? Is there a way in which we can explain it? I'm just
Yeah. That's what I said. Maybe there, perhaps when humans were all more in tune with nature,
Mhm.
we are not in tune with nature now.
Fair. So
So we do not
we
know
live
that.
in a
Yeah.
time, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When we all are familiar with the London cab driver study and how the hippocampus, is plastic and changes in size as you undergo the training and the knowledge and so on.
Yeah.
In music research and neuroscience, has something like that been demonstrated that with continuous learning and practice, there's actually a change in the way that your brain pathways are syncing or brain structures, are. Is there anything like that that's been demonstrated?
Yes, yes, definitely. So musicians are considered as a role model to study neural plasticity.
Right.
Yeah. So the number of hours of practice, the
Mhm.
type of instrument that one is trained in, piano versus stringed instrument, and all of that, there are structural and functional changes also noted.
Right.
And studies done, even cross-sectional and longitudinal studies of undergoing musical training, impacting structural, functional, and also bringing about neurocognitive changes.
Right.
That is also done. So
Right.
the auditory areas are known to be larger. The Heschel's gyre area is larger.
Right.
There is omega sign, which is very more distinct and very clear and enlarged in pianists.
Right.
So
Right.
parietal areas.
Right.
And cognitive function wise, we know that musicians or children who are trained in music for longer duration have benefits in their prefrontal executive function, especially response inhibition.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there are innumerable studies coming from that direction.
Wonderful. So leading on from that, and going back also referring to how you're using beats, for example, to retrain people for cognition and so on. We have this. Our tradition is both oral and oral.
Yes.
You're supposed to remember the music and reproduce it. including in fact, I learned the Rudram,
Hmm.
Rudram. And again, you're supposed to remember not just the syntax, you're supposed to remember where you go up, where you come down,
Yeah, the Udatta Anudatta Swarita has to be known. Yes, yes, correct.
and so on. Whereas the Western tradition is more a note based tradition.
Yes,
And
yes.
do you see any particular advantages or disadvantages in relying on the Indic tradition for cognitive rehabilitation and working with people across the lifespan? I mean, we have children with ADHD and autism, and we have elders with dementia and Parkinson's. So I'm just wondering how this plays across the lifespan.
I know that's a very interesting question. First, yes, uh, with the manner in which our Indian tradition is taught in the Guru Shishya Parampara, the oral tradition, and there's so much of similarity with what you mentioned of learning the Vedic texts and the classical music. So, in the Vedic text, we have the Ghana, Jata, and to know that there are errorless learning. So, if you want to learn the Vedas or the mantras, it has to be with no error. As you said, the swaras have to be right there for each matra and each syllable and all of that. Something similar in music tradition in both Hindustani and Carnatic is the permutation combination of notes, the rhythm, everything that we learn. The swaras, for example, in sargams we say in Hindustani, or janti verse or sarale verse in Carnatic music. All combinations of music. We should know which note am I hitting, like sa re sa ga sa pa sa dha sa sa, all that, and those multiple combinations in different time rhythm patterns and all of that. So all these exercises surely should have beneficial effect for the ones who actively engage with music and learn music. But as a neuropsychologist, what you may not see is musical dyslexia. In Western tradition, there are case reports of patients after stroke or epilepsy having musical dyslexia. That means unable to read the Western notations that you mentioned. That may not occur as a phenomenon in Indian tradition, right? Because we write with what language I speak or I learn. I may be in Bengaluru, but I may learn Carnatic composition, that is Telugu, and write it in Kannada. And the Sargama also, I may write it in Hindi or Devanagari or Tamil or the scripture. Whereas Western musicians have to know those notations. It's a visuospatial task. It's like learning a new language.
Right.
The brain area for another language is already being trained and encoded. So, another important point of music in the brain, which I perhaps forgot to mention earlier, it's modular in nature. That means there are different areas for certain features of music. Rhythm is in one, has its own pathway. Melody has its own pathway. The combination of this understanding the structure has its own pathway. So, post certain neurological condition, there can be selective sparing or deficit of these functions. Just like aphasia, I may have conduction aphasia, I may have Broca's aphasia, I may have Wernicke's aphasia. Same thing may happen. I may I may remember the lyrics, I may forget the melodic line. I may know the melodic line, but I may forget the lyrics. I may not be able to keep up with the rhythm, things like that. So when we talk about Western tradition and comparing it with Indian tradition, here I may not see something called as an acquired musical dyslexia. Second, in Western tradition, we talk about absolute pitch. That means on the piano, the note is fixed. This heard is this C or D or E, F, G. Whereas if you take the Indian tradition, my sa can be, as I did earlier, sa re ga ma pa dha ni sa ni da pa ma ga re sa. This is my sa, one note. But sa re sa re ga ma pa dha ni sa ni da pa ma ga re sa. I can change the pitch. I didn't do it right now, sorry. It's an offhand thing. But you can change the shadj. It's not fixed. So, how do you then study as a neuroscientist whether absolute pitch exists in Indian musicians because we don't go by this certain frequency with certain note. With the current fusion music and using piano with Indian instrumentation, all that, we use Western notes and musicians will have that jargons coming in. But I'm saying it from more from as a neurological phenomenon. Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful.
There will be differences and similarities. Oh.
Right. Right. How interesting. You have this rich experience of also working with people and patients, you and your team. Can you share a memorable experience of working with somebody and how music made a difference? A patient you worked with.
Actually, an interesting and a very rare condition where music became troublesome, musicogenic epilepsy. So I
Right.
had these two patients who were referred to our unit, and this lady could not even listen to certain songs after 13 to 14 seconds, and then she would end up having a seizure. So much so that her immediate environment, family environment, everything had to be adjusted accordingly. No ringtone, no television with music. So imagine her world had to be without music. That something was like, you know, very unthinkable for me, and it did cause a lot of distress for her also.
And
And
especially if she was used to having music in her life before.
yeah, before. And another lady who had to change her lifestyle, like she could not go out in the street because if there is a loudspeaker, some function or something where music is played, she knew she would have a seizure after that. So
Right.
she had to restrict. So many of the things of her lifestyle changed because of this condition. That's the extreme condition.
Right.
The other is patient with dementia who become very irritable and not cooperative during neurocognitive retraining or neuropsychological sessions, making them listen to this calming music, the ala part of certain ragas. I don't go by raga, but it could be certain pleasant ragas. You see that there is change in their ability to allocate attention, ability to interact after about 15-20 minutes. And again, some patients say, I don't listen to such music. I don't like this music. One day, one session and second session. But after 1 or 2 sessions, they say that sets in. They say, yeah, I like this music. Can you give me more of this? That also has happened.
Right. Right. In fact, we have this elder with early dementia.
Hmm.
One of his favorite things is Lata Mangeshkar song.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
many of the therapy sessions are just him and the therapist singing together. Because he's quite irritable. He's not really willing to converse too much with people. But then when you get him to sing a song, especially if it's a Lata Mangeshkar song, then he's very happy. So
Yes.
it changes his mood and his willingness to engage. And then
Yes.
you can actually go on for a very long period of time. So it has
Yes.
this very positive effect.
Yes. Yes.
The other very interesting thing I have seen, not a patient of mine, a patient of my father's, this was a lady with very severe Parkinson's who could hardly speak.
Hmm.
She was a trained Carnatic vocalist of some repute.
Hmm.
But if you asked her to sing and you started singing with her, she would break into song.
Hmm.
So, I can't speak. I have great difficulty in expressing myself through, my voice. But when it comes to music, I'm able to actually do something relatively effortlessly and flawlessly. How do you explain something like that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, especially in Parkinson's patient and movement disorder, the rhythmic auditory stimulation helps a lot. The external cueing. In this case, even if she's a musician,
Yes.
while speaking, the pathway is different.
Right.
The moment you start singing, the neural pathway is perhaps another pathway.
Right.
Therefore, they're able to engage with that smooth rhythmic transition. And the beauty of rhythmic entrainment is that the anticipation of the next is so smooth that
Right.
I know if I say 1, 2, you know when the 3 is going to come already.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
expectation and an external cueing actually smoothens this particular process.
That's Very nice to know. You are at this very unique vantage point between traditional knowledge and clinical practice. And you were talking earlier about how difficult it is to do clinical trials with some of these, variations that we work with in our Indic tradition. I have two kinds of questions. One is, this is true for all of non-pharmacological therapy, that I argue all the time that double-blind trials were built for drug research. They
Right.
don't work for non-pharmacological therapy of any kind.
Correct.
So how can we overcome this? Is the first question. How do we overcome this? The research that we do is the first question. The related question is, why do we feel duty bound to follow another tradition, however well established? So,
Yes, I
look forward to your
completely
answers.
resonate and agree with you, and that's what I started off with saying, that maybe the tool that we are using, the method that we are using, may not be the appropriate one. Like, I have something to be measured in liquid, like liters, but I'm saying no, I have to measure it in centimeter or in inches. How will that work? Perhaps our Indian tradition, our music, to some extent will lend itself for a neuroscientific research that is happening. Like, I will take as a stimuli. The question will be, how ecologically valid is it? Is it restricted to only this excerpt that I did the EEG study on, or an fMRI study on? How can I generalize it to another raga? These questions, I don't think we'll find an answer for that. And how do we question the experiential knowledge? Like, as a student of music, I know how each raga can change my mood, how it can, so there is a lot of subjective experience to it. And the same raga I sing on a day one versus another day, that might change. That's why we say the manodharma of that artist and that particular day, so many factors can play a role. Then how do we account for all these in a so-called RCT trial, where I say I'll control for extraneous variable and I know this is what it is? I agree that we shouldn't be bound by saying I'll answer all the questions through this method only. Perhaps I feel the way I am moving forward, there will be a point where I'll say we need to depend on more case reports, case studies, experiential, subjective reports of individuals, which is so rich in giving us information rather than just the RCT kind of studies as well.
We are in Atmanirbhar Bharat, but we don't always think like that, isn't it? That's part of
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah. No, we don't have, that's why we don't have to feel that is something is inferior if we are not able to prove it just because we don't have an RCT study. And I always have this debate that many young musicians will say, no, I want to study cognition. I say not that it has something is superior or something is inferior, but you need to be properly trained either to be a clinician or a musician. It can't be just randomly I do something and then I want to report something. That's also not good. That's also not correct.
Which leads me to my next question. What's your advice to young people entering this field? People who want to study music and cognition further, or perhaps even take what we've been talking about, how music in the Indic traditions, how it influences emotions. What would your advice be?
One is, you have to have some sound knowledge of any tradition. It could be, now since we are talking about the Indian tradition, it could be in Indian classical tradition or some folk tradition. Some knowledge has to be there. Second, if somebody is interested to do clinical work, or translate it to clinical application, I would say sound training in any of the clinical pedagogy is important. Either you are a psychologist or a medical person, or any of the therapy, that training has to be very, very important, because it gives you clarity on how do I think as a researcher, how do I think as a clinician in curating the research clinical goals and the research goals. That is second. Thirdly, if any student of music, now this field of music cognition or neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience is a multidisciplinary thing. So, students who have taken up engineering can still study music, can still contribute. Now, with all these technology coming into picture in the clinical realm. But it's like a lot of people can contribute from multiple perspectives. So if some student, I've already studied and I've finished my engineering, now I want to get into psychology, I say don't do that kind of jump. Rather, you have so much that you can contribute from that field to this field. That would be my advice, if you were to say.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask you one final question. We have such a unique knowledge base of the Vedas, and you've linked them to music in some way, and you rightly pointed out, for example, that as the Vedas evolved, music may have evolved too, and the Sama Veda has got a very strong, rich tradition of music built in to it. If someone wants to take that further, that interface between the Vedas and the music,
Yeah.
do you think that's going to be possible to do in research?
Yes, definitely. Immense scope there. We need to do a lot more research. I sometimes I need multiple lifetimes to finish. What all, there's so much to do.
Yes.
Second thing is, we definitely on one hand take pride in saying, yeah, we have such rich tradition. But if you ask how many people who actually recite Veda have understood the meaning of it,
Yes.
it's just not the lyrics. It's just, yes, one aspect is the vibration, the frequency, the swara combination, all that is fine. Second is, if you're really studying Vedas and mantras, and I think it's important even from the point of view of education, not just from neuroscience, clinical aspect, but if I were to study impact of learning Vedas, I would also want to focus on what is the difference if someone understands the meaning of it, the true meaning of it, versus just reciting it by heart. There may be benefit. There may be multifold benefit if we were to understand the meaning of it.
Understand.
Yeah.
And that would hold true for music as well, isn't it? Because you pointed out, you're singing a Tyagaraja Kriti in a language that you don't know very well, or in Sanskrit. Puthuswami Dikshita Kriti in Sanskrit that you don't know very well. So you might be better off if you knew the meaning of what you were singing beyond the specifically, not in a generic sort of sense. I mean, we know that it's in praise of so and so, but if every word was better understood, it might actually make greater impact, isn't it?
Very true. Very true. Very true. That's why I think learning music, engaging with music and the Veda tradition over time, as I said, first, if we go by how we acquire knowledge from our childhood, first we learn the alphabet, then we learn the words, then we learn sentences. Then, as we grow, maybe we read literature, poetry, and our life experiences adds to that. Sometimes this very same book which I would have read when I was younger and later time point, my interpretation of the very same story changes because of my life experiences also. So emotion training, empathy, team building spirit, like music is in Indian tradition also, it is kacheri. Unlike in the West, we may have choir and orchestra, but here also it is a team aspect.
Yes.
Then finally spiritual content of it.
Yeah.
So if we then talk about it as a psychologist and a psychiatrist, that's the best thing I can talk about, building positive mental health aspects of it.
Pathways to happiness.
Yes, cognition, emotion, spiritual aspect, and layers of it.
So if you've not already written a book, I'm going to suggest you write Indian Music and Your Brain, a step-by-step guide.
Yes. Thank you. Your words will motivate me to really put my thoughts into action. I really want to write a book, just that maybe I should take a sabbatical, which I haven't done yet.
It's been wonderful having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge with us in a short period of time.
My pleasure, Krishnamurthy sir. Thank you so much for having me. It's indeed
Ladies
an
and
honor.
gentlemen, that was Professor Shantala Hegde, neuromusicologist, talking to us about raga and the brain in the Indian music tradition. If you liked this episode of the Neurokrish Immersion, do subscribe and like and share. And we are on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in.